Robert was only 9 years old when he realized something strange about his life. He had two fathers, but neither of them was his real father by blood. One was his best friend Mike's father. Everyone in the neighborhood called him the smart businessman. The other was Robert's own father, known around town as the educated man with a good job. Both men lived in the same state of Hawaii, both worked hard, and both wanted the best for their children. But the way they talked about money, opportunity, and success could not have been more different. Robert remembered sitting at the wooden kitchen table one warm Saturday morning. His father, who worked for the state government, had his glasses low on his nose and a stack of papers beside him. He looked tired, even though it was only 8 a.m. "Robert," he said kindly, "if you want to have a safe future, you must study hard, get good grades, and find a secure job. That's the smartest path." Robert nodded politely, but inside, he felt unsure. His father knew many things: history, politics, teaching, but whenever the topic of money came up, he seemed stressed. Later that same day, Robert went to visit Mike. As usual, Mike's father, the man who would soon become Robert's rich dad, was already outside, checking on his stores. He owned small shops, real estate, and even a few vending machines around town. Unlike Robert's father, he didn't wear a suit. He wore an old t-shirt, heavy work boots, and a smile that said he loved what he did. When he saw the boys, he laughed. "Morning, boys. Ready to learn something new today?" Mike nodded instantly. Robert did too. Rich Dad knelt down so he was eye level with them. "If you want to be rich," he said, "you must learn how money truly works. Not from school, from life." Those words surprised Robert. School? Not enough life? What did that mean? Rich Dad continued. "The poor and the middle class work for money. But rich people, smart people, make money work for them." Robert felt a spark, a kind of excitement he didn't fully understand yet. It was like someone had opened a door in a house he didn't know. He was living in point two fathers, point two philosophies, point two roads. And Robert knew, even at 9 years old, that the lessons he was about to learn would change his future forever. Mike and I spent the next few days thinking about what Rich Dad had told us. We were only kids from Honolulu, but his words made us feel like we were stepping into a bigger world. One where money wasn't just something you spent, but something you could control. That on a warm Saturday morning, Mike and I rode our bikes to his father's repair shop. It was an old wooden building, always full of noise. Hammers hitting metal, workers shouting measurements, machines humming like giant bees. The place smelled like oil, sawdust, and hot sunshine. Rich Dad stood near a workbench, talking to one of his employees. When he saw us, he gave a small smile, the kind of smile that makes you nervous and excited at the same time. "You boys came back," he said. "Good. Most people ask for money, but never return when it's time to work for it." We looked at each other. "We're ready," I said, though my voice shook a little. "Then let's begin." He said he didn't take us to an office or give us a desk. Instead, he walked us to the storage room behind the shop. Inside were stacks of old newspapers, dust-covered boxes, and tools that looked older than both of us. "This is where you'll work," Rich Dad said. "You'll do simple tasks at first: sorting, organizing, cleaning. 3 hours every week. I'll pay you 10 cents an hour." Even at 12 years old, I knew 10 cents wasn't much. Dad, my poor dad, had told me to demand more. But Rich Dad was teaching something different. Something strange. Something I didn't understand yet. Still, Mike and I nodded that we worked hard, that we wiped shelves, carried boxes, bundled newspapers, and did jobs adults didn't want to do. Our hands got dirty, our backs got sore, and the hours felt endless. The first day, I earned only 30 cents. 30 cents. It felt shocking and unfair. As we left the shop, I muttered, "Your dad is taking advantage of us." Mike didn't disagree, but neither of us quit. Every week we returned. Every week we earned almost nothing. Every week we wondered what lesson we were supposed to learn. Until one day, it came. The moment that changed everything. It was a hot afternoon when Rich Dad unexpectedly appeared in the storage room. He watched us quietly, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "You boys look angry," he finally said. I dropped the broom. "Because this isn't fair. We work hard, but you pay us almost nothing. My dad says I should ask for more money." Rich Dad stepped closer. "And what have you learned so far?" I opened my mouth, then stopped. I didn't actually know. Rich Dad nodded as if he expected that. "Good," he said. "Because today, We talk about your first real lesson, the lesson that most adults never understand. Mike and I leaned in. This was the moment we'd been waiting for. Money, Rich Dad said slowly, is not the real problem. The problem is fear and desire. And most people let those two things control their whole life. We didn't understand. Not yet, but we were ready to listen. And this was the beginning of everything. As Robert grew up, Rich Dad continued teaching him lessons, not just about earning money, but about how to make money work. One late afternoon in suburban California, Rich Dad sat with Robert on the porch of his modest home. The golden light of sunset glowed over the quiet street. "Robert," Rich Dad said, "there's something many people never understand. Your profession is not your business." He paused, letting that sink in. Robert frowned. "What do you mean? My job is how I make money. That's what work is, right?" Rich Dad smiled softly. "Yes, a job pays you. That's your income. But your business? That's what you build when you invest in things that make money for you, even when you're not working." To make the idea concrete, Rich Dad told Robert a story about Ray Kroc, the man who made McDonald's a giant. When Kroc was asked, "What business are you in?" he didn't say, "I sell burgers." He said, "I'm in the real estate business." McDonald's success, Rich Dad explained, wasn't just about hamburgers. It was about owning the land, the locations. That real estate is the asset. That's where the money is. Robert listened, wide-eyed. Rich Dad leaned forward. "You've got to start building your asset column, not just living off your paycheck. Even if you keep your job, use part of your extra money to buy things that generate income. Real estate, stocks, small business, whatever you understand and believe in. But don't just spend on things that drain your wallet." He continued, "Many people think buying a nice house, a car, or expensive gadgets is a sign of being wealthy. But some of those are liabilities, not real assets. They cost you more in the long run. The rich buy their luxuries last, after building their assets." Robert nodded slowly, seeing the difference. "So, I should keep working, but I also need to start investing, build my own business in a way." "Exactly," said Rich Dad. "Your day job pays the bills. But your business, your real business, that's your path to financial freedom." That evening, Robert lay in bed replaying the conversation in his mind. The idea of owning something, not just working, felt both exciting and scary. But for the first time, he realized that to be truly in control of his future, he had to think bigger than a monthly paycheck. He made a promise to himself. He would start small, but he would start. His business would be his own, and he would not confuse it with just a job. The next Saturday morning, Robert arrived at Rich Dad's office in Honolulu, where the smell of fresh paper and old wooden desks filled the air. This was where Rich Dad managed his small businesses, convenience stores, rental properties, and a few local partnerships. It wasn't a fancy place, but it felt alive, like a classroom without walls. Rich Dad handed Robert a thick folder. "What's this?" Robert asked. "Your next lesson," Rich Dad replied. "Financial education. School teaches you to work for money. I'll teach you to make money work for you." Robert opened the folder. Inside were sheets labeled assets and liabilities, with simple numbers and examples. Rich Dad pointed to the top page. "Most people," he said, "go to school, get a job, earn a paycheck, and then spend that paycheck on things they think make them look successful. A new car, a bigger house, the newest TV. But these things often become liabilities. They take money out of your pocket every month." He moved his finger to the assets column. Assets put money into your pocket. Real estate, dividends from stocks, a small business that runs even when you're sleeping. These build wealth. Robert leaned forward, studying the page carefully. "In school," Rich Dad continued, "they rarely teach you about money. Teachers can't teach what they don't know. They tell you to get good grades, find a safe job, and climb the ladder. But they never explain how the financial world really works." He walked Robert toward a window overlooking one of his small stores across the street. "Look at that business," he said. "People think owning a store is about selling goods. But that store is also a system, a money machine. Once it's running well, it earns money without me being there. That's an asset." Robert watched customers walking in and out, grabbing snacks, paying at the counter, leaving with bags. "So you don't work there?" Robert asked. Rich Dad laughed. "Of course not. I hire people who know how to run it. My job is to understand the numbers, the flow of money. Rich people don't get rich because they work harder. They get rich because they understand how money behaves. Robert felt his mind opening even wider. So, if I learn the language of money, I can control my financial future? Exactly, Rich Dad said. The poor and middle class work for money. The rich have money work for them. And that difference begins with financial education, not a high salary. That evening, walking home with the folder under his arm, Robert felt something shift inside him. Most kids his age were thinking about hobbies, friends, and fun. But he was thinking about cash flow, assets, and building a future that wasn't controlled by fear or bills. That he realized he was learning something no school could teach, something that could change his entire life. Robert was now in college, living in a small shared apartment in Arizona. Life was busy, classes, part-time jobs, late-night study sessions, but Rich Dad's lessons never left him. One weekend, Robert drove back to Honolulu to visit both his dads. It was a warm morning when he met Rich Dad in his office, now upgraded to a larger building overlooking the marina. Rich Dad looked at Robert and said, "Now that you're earning a little money, it's time for the next step. Pay yourself first." Robert raised an eyebrow. "But I barely have enough to pay my bills. How do I pay myself first?" Rich Dad smiled. "That's exactly why most people never get rich. They pay everyone else first. The landlord, the credit card companies, the government, the stores, the bills. And if anything is left, then they try to save or invest." He leaned forward. "But the rich? They flip the order. They invest first, then figure out how to pay everything else." Robert felt confused. "Isn't that risky? What if I can't pay my bills?" "It is uncomfortable," Rich Dad said. "But that discomfort pushes you to grow. When you pay yourself first, you force your mind to find ways to create extra income. You learn discipline. You activate creativity." He gave Robert a simple rule. 10% of every dollar you earn goes straight to your asset column. No excuses. No skipping. Robert stared at the notebook where he wrote the rule. It looked so easy, but he knew it would be hard. Rich Dad continued, "Remember, I'm not telling you to avoid bills or ignore responsibilities. I'm telling you to build the habit of putting your financial future first. If you don't, nobody else will." For the next few weeks, Robert put the rule into practice. Every time he got his paycheck from the university bookstore, he moved a small amount into a separate account, his assets fund. And every month, the same thing happened. Bills came. Money ran short. Stress arrived. And yet, he did not touch the money in that asset fund. One afternoon, Robert found himself sitting at a small cafe near campus, feeling overwhelmed. "This is impossible," he muttered. "I can't keep doing this." But then he remembered Rich Dad's words. Pressure creates innovation. So Robert brainstormed that he picked up small freelance tasks, that he tutored students in English, that he sold old textbooks online. He even started helping a local business with inventory for extra cash. Slowly, something changed. Robert realized he was building a skill many people never learn. The ability to generate money on demand. He felt stronger, smarter, more confident. That separate account, the one he refused to touch, began to grow. It was small, but it was growing. It felt like planting the first seeds of a future forest. One night, staring at the small balance in his account, Robert smiled. It wasn't much yet, but it represented discipline, courage, and control. For the first time, he felt rich, not because of the money he had, but because of the habits he was building. Robert was in his mid-20s when Rich Dad invited him to spend a weekend in Phoenix, Arizona. They stayed at one of Rich Dad's rental properties, a quiet, peaceful duplex near a newly developing commercial area. That on Saturday morning, Rich Dad handed Robert a cup of coffee and said, "Today, I want to show you something most people are too afraid to look at: opportunity." They stepped outside and walked around the neighborhood. The houses were older, the sidewalks cracked, and some yards needed cleaning. It wasn't fancy, but it was changing. Rich Dad pointed toward a large construction site. "See that? A new shopping center. When businesses move in, families follow. When families move in, rents rise. When rents rise, property values rise." Robert nodded. "So you bought here before the growth?" Rich Dad smiled. "Exactly. But not because I'm lucky, because I pay attention. Investors look for signs. Most people look for comfort." They walked back into the duplex. It had simple furniture, clean walls, and a quiet charm. A young couple rented it. Rich Dad said, "This property pays for itself through rent." The tenants cover the mortgage, taxes, and repairs. What's left is positive cash flow, and the value increases over time. Robert asked, "But what if I don't have enough money to buy something like this right now?" Rich Dad sat down and spoke firmly. Start small. Start early. Start consistently. The amount isn't important. The habit is. He explained how he had begun investing at age 20 with tiny purchases. Old vending machine, small pieces of land, low-cost stocks, little business ventures. Most didn't make me rich, Rich Dad said, laughing. But they taught me how money behaves. Then he added something Robert never forgot. Money is a teacher, but only if you give it a job. He gave Robert 3 rules. 1. Pay yourself first before bills, before expenses. Invest a small portion into an asset. Point 2. Buy assets, not liabilities. Assets give you money. Liabilities take your money. Point 3. Use time as your greatest tool. The earlier you start, the less you need later. As they sat on the balcony, watching the Arizona sunset melt into shades of orange and purple, Robert felt something shift inside him. It wasn't excitement. It was clarity that he finally understood what Rich Dad meant. He didn't need to be rich to start investing, that he needed to start investing to become rich. By the time Robert reached his early 20s, he had already tasted small failures, small wins, and big lessons. But Rich Dad told him there was something even more important than assets, money, or business plans. Your mindset, Robert, Rich Dad said one cool morning in Phoenix, Arizona, is your greatest asset or your greatest liability. They were walking through a quiet neighborhood where new houses were being built. Construction workers hammered, sawed, and shouted directions. Rich Dad stopped in front of a partly finished home and pointed at it. See that? A house always starts with a foundation. People know this. But when it comes to money, most people skip building a mental foundation. They rush into earning, spending, borrowing, and guessing. That's why they break down. Robert looked at the foundation slab, silent. Rich Dad continued. The poor and middle class often say things like, "I can't afford that," or "That's too expensive." Their brain stops working. But the rich ask, "How can I afford this?" That question forces the brain to search, to solve, to create. He tapped his fingers lightly on his temple. What you think becomes what you do, and what you do becomes what you have. Later that day, they sat inside a small diner. The smell of coffee and bacon filled the air. Rich Dad opened a notebook and drew 2 boxes. Fear and desire. These control most people, he said. Fear keeps them stuck in jobs they hate. Desire makes them buy things they don't need. Together, they trap people in a financial cycle. Robert studied the sketch. So how do I escape the cycle? Rich Dad smiled. By developing the mindset of the wealthy. You learn every day. You take risks, but educated risks. You don't let fear stop you. And you control desire by letting discipline lead your decisions. He took a bite of his sandwich, then added, "Money flows to those who think differently, Robert. Your emotions must support your goals, not sabotage them." That night, Robert drove home through the quiet Arizona streets, thinking deeply about Rich Dad's words. He realized that success wasn't only about the investments he bought. It was about the thoughts he allowed into his life. If he wanted financial freedom, he needed to train his mind the same way athletes train their bodies. And from that day forward, he promised himself, no more excuses, no more fear, no more limits, only growth. Robert was now a teenager living in Hawaii, but Rich Dad often invited him to fly to the mainland USA during summers. One warm July morning in Arizona, Rich Dad took Robert to one of his small strip malls. It wasn't fancy, just a line of simple stores, a laundromat, a small grocery shop, a haircut salon, and a local bakery. Rich Dad put his hand on Robert's shoulder. "Look around," he said. "This place pays me even when I'm asleep." That's what assets do. Robert watched as people walked in and out of the shops. "You mean all of these people help you earn money?" "Not the people," Rich Dad said with a smile. "The businesses and the building help me earn. That's why financial education matters. Schools teach you how to work for money. Rich people learn how to make money work for them." He explained how he bought the property when everyone thought the neighborhood had no future. Rich Dad studied markets, demographics, and trends, skills traditional schools never taught. Without financial education, he said, most people use money the wrong way. They buy liabilities and call them assets. They let fear and ignorance control their decisions. Robert listened carefully, understanding now why his poor dad, though highly educated, struggled financially. He had good intentions but lacked financial literacy. Rich Dad pointed to a nail salon. That business pays rent every month. That rent pays my mortgage. After the mortgage is gone, that rent becomes income. That's financial intelligence. Robert felt a new kind of excitement. Not the excitement of earning a paycheck, but the excitement of creating something that lasts. Part 5. The lesson of taking risks. A year later, in San Diego, Robert sat with Rich Dad at a diner overlooking the ocean. Seagulls flew overhead, waves rolled gently, and surfers paddled out into the water. Robert, Rich Dad began, life is full of risks. The poor avoid risks. The middle class takes calculated risks. The rich learn how to manage risk. He pulled out 2 napkins. On one, he wrote, fear of losing. On the other, he wrote, fear of missing out. Most people never build wealth because the first fear controls them, he said. They're so scared of losing money that they never try anything new. Rich Dad then told Robert about his first failed business. I lost money. I felt embarrassed. But I learned. And what I learned made me millions later. Robert took a deep breath. So losing money isn't the end? Rich Dad laughed. Losing money is part of the journey. Failure teaches more than success ever could. But you must learn from it, not run from it. To make the lesson real, Rich Dad gave Robert a small challenge. Find a small investment opportunity. Study it, analyze it, and come back to me. You can lose, you can win, but you must act. For the first time, Robert felt the real world calling him. A world where courage mattered more than grades. Part 6. Taxes and corporations. The wealthy advantage. During one winter break, Rich Dad took Robert to his office in downtown Phoenix. The building wasn't huge, but it looked professional. Tall glass windows, polished floors, and hallways filled with busy employees. Inside a meeting room, Rich Dad drew a simple box on the whiteboard. This, he said, is a corporation. He drew another box beside it. This is an employee. Robert sat forward, ready. Employees earn money, pay taxes, and then try to live on what's left. He wrote, employee earn tax, spend, but the wealthy, Rich Dad continued, use corporations. They earn money, spend it on business expenses, investments, and only then pay taxes. He wrote, corporation earn, spend tax. Robert was shocked. So, the rich legally pay less tax because they use corporations? Rich Dad nodded. Exactly. The system rewards those who understand it. Financial education again. He explained deductions, business expenses, legal protections, and why corporations are tools, not just for big companies, but for anyone who wants to build wealth. Most people think corporations are only for the rich, Rich Dad said. The truth is, they're rich because they use corporations. That day changed Robert's understanding of money forever. Part 7. Overcoming doubt and building confidence. Robert wasn't always confident. Even with Rich Dad's guidance, doubt often crept in. What if he wasn't smart enough? What if his decisions ruined his future? One afternoon in Las Vegas, where Rich Dad was checking a new property deal, Robert admitted, sometimes I feel I don't know enough. It's scary. Rich Dad smiled kindly. Good. That means you're growing. Confidence doesn't come first. Action comes first. Confidence follows. He took Robert to a small real estate auction happening nearby. People raised paddles, shouted numbers, and scribbled notes. It felt chaotic. You see these people? Rich Dad said. Many of them were once scared, just like you. But they learned. They acted. And confidence followed. He made Robert participate, not to buy anything, but to analyze. Watch. Evaluate deals. Feel the environment. You'll never be ready, Rich Dad told him. You'll become ready in the process. As they left the auction house, Robert felt something new. Not full confidence, but less fear, which was already a victory. Part 8. The turning point. First real investment. Now 18, Robert had saved a small amount from part-time jobs, side gigs, and small hustles Rich Dad encouraged. With Rich Dad's permission, he studied local markets in California. Finally, he found something. A small, rundown condo in a neighborhood everyone ignored. It was cheap because the owner needed to sell urgently. Robert presented it to Rich Dad. Let's see your numbers, Rich Dad said. Robert explained the price, renovation cost, possible rent, and neighborhood potential. He felt nervous. This was his first real investment proposal. When he finished, Rich Dad leaned back and smiled. You've done well. Not perfect, but good. And most importantly, you acted. Together, they went to inspect the condo. It needed work, peeling paint, old carpet, broken cabinets. But beneath the mess, Rich Dad saw potential. Do you want this to be your first investment? He asked. Robert nodded with excitement and fear mixed together. Then make the offer, Rich Dad said. Today, Robert did. And the owner accepted. Driving home that evening, Robert looked at the contract in his hands. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was the beginning of his journey toward financial independence. For the first time in his life, he felt like someone who wasn't just learning about money. He was building wealth. By now, Robert had started seeing the world differently. He had small investments, some lessons from Rich Dad, and even a few failures under his belt. But there was one obstacle he couldn't ignore. Fear point. One evening, Rich Dad invited Robert to the city's financial district. Skyscrapers reflected the fading sunset, their glass facades shimmering like gold. Do you see those buildings, Robert? Rich Dad asked. Every one of them was once a risk someone took. Someone believed in an idea that others doubted. That's how fortunes are made. Robert admitted, I'm scared. What if I lose everything I invest in? What if I fail completely? Rich Dad nodded. Fear is normal. But let me tell you something most people never learn. The fear of losing money is what keeps you poor. You must learn to manage fear, not ignore it. That means starting small, learning as you go, and never investing blindly. He paused, pointing to a small coffee shop on the corner. See that cafe? The owner risked everything he had to start it. Some days, he made nothing. Some days, he made too much. But he learned how to turn risk into opportunity. That's the mindset you need. Robert realized that taking calculated risks was part of building wealth. It wasn't reckless. It was thoughtful, informed, and disciplined. He remembered all the times he had hesitated to invest, only to watch others succeed. Rich Dad, he said quietly. I want to stop letting fear control me. I want to start seeing opportunity, not danger. That's the spirit, Rich Dad replied. Wealth doesn't come to those who are comfortable. It comes to those willing to act, learn, and adapt. And yes, sometimes you'll fail, but failure is only the tuition you pay for wisdom. That night, Robert went home with a new mindset. He made a list of small opportunities he could explore safely, some stocks, a few local business ideas, and ways to learn from mentors. He knew the journey wouldn't be easy, but he felt ready. Fear would always be there, but now it had a purpose, to guide him, not paralyze him. Years had passed since Robert first met Rich Dad. The lessons about money, fear, and opportunity had stayed with him. He had experienced failures, small victories, and moments of doubt. But he had kept learning, kept growing. One sunny morning in his home office, overlooking a bustling American city, Robert reflected on his journey. His investments were growing, his small businesses were thriving, and most importantly, he felt in control of his financial future. Rich Dad's words echoed in his mind. Your money should work for you, not the other way around. Robert smiled. He remembered his poor dad too, always emphasizing job security, pensions, and saving. He realized that while his poor dad taught him about discipline and hard work, Rich Dad had taught him how to think about money differently. That mindset made all the difference. He thought about all the young people he knew, who were afraid of risk, drowning in debt, and confused about wealth. Robert decided to share what he had learned. He started mentoring a small group of ambitious teenagers, teaching them the lessons Rich Dad had taught him. Mind your own business. Build assets, not just work for a paycheck. Financial education is priceless. Learn about money, taxes, and investments. Understand the difference between assets and liabilities. Don't buy things that take money out of your pocket. Embrace fear and take calculated risks. Growth comes outside your comfort zone. Act. Don't just dream. Ideas alone aren't enough. Execution matters. As he looked at the group of eager young faces, Robert felt a sense of purpose beyond wealth. He understood now that financial freedom wasn't just about money. It was about choices, independence, and the ability to live life on your terms. Rich Dad's lessons had transformed him. He wasn't just rich in money. He was rich in knowledge, mindset, and freedom. And as he continued to invest, learn, and grow, Robert realized that financial freedom was not a destination. It was a journey, and he had finally learned how to navigate it. The sun set over the city, casting long shadows over skyscrapers and streets filled with opportunity. Robert smiled, knowing that the real riches were not in the dollars he earned, but in the wisdom he had gained and the life he had built.